Welcome back to another edition of the Wolverine.com podcast. My name is Chris Balas. With me, Doug Skene, my podcast partner, and today's special guest, Angelique Chengelis. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's right.
There you go, Angelique.
Yeah.
It's Angelique. It's Angelique Chengelis, longtime colleague and good friend, as much as it pains me to admit it, and probably more so you. But with the Roger Federer in the background, that has scared the hell out of so many people. Angelique, I can't even tell you how many people, when they get on a Zoom call or something like that, and he comes on there, it's like they think he's getting ready to attack you, which of course you'd be okay with if he did it kindly. Let's be honest.
I don't know where else to put Roger. I really don't. I don't know where else to put it. It's right there, so I apologize.
You don't have to apologize, but you should put him by the front door and like standing in there, and you'll never have any burglars or anything.
That's a thought.
I appreciate.
I think I might get a cutout of you for that effect.
Well, hey, I do scare a lot of people away. So everybody says I have a face for radio, and I don't know what that means. But I'm just happy to be here and still doing this after so many years. And speaking of so many years, we were just at Big Ten Media Day, and how many of those have we covered over the years? And it's funny, when I first started, I was thinking, man, John Borton's done a lot of these things, and it had been like 8 or 9, right? And now this was actually my 20th full time. We won't even mention Angelique's been there longer than me. So, and Skene takes it all in with his popcorn.
It was my 30th. It was my 30th.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah.
You don't look old enough. And in all reality, you don't look old enough to have done 30 media days. Unless you were like one of those junior reporters that was asking the hard-hitting questions. To like Michigan State's Mel Tucker. That was my favorite. Why did you suck last year, and how are you going to fix it? Basically is what the kids said. Mel was really nice to him.
Those kids were really good. I mean, they were very poised and asked really good questions, and we probably could learn something from them. They were good. But, interrupt your big intro here, but I think my first year was Doug's senior year, the first year I covered the team. But wait, were you there 2 years? 92 was my first.
So, the fall of 92 would have been your first year covering the team, and that would have been our senior year, our 5th year. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you remember seeing her there, Skene, at Media Day?
I had a lot of memories about Media Day, and I think if I can recall, yes, some questions, because Angelique always had the special interest of what the offensive linemen were thinking, because if you can get a good beat on what the offensive linemen are thinking and expecting, then you can set a proper prediction for the season. Good offensive line equals good season. Bad offensive line equals challenging season.
And, of course, the offensive line, when we're thinking about how many burgers they're going to eat at John Vitale's house when you first got there. So that probably didn't help much. But, all right, Angelique, you and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I don't know how much Skene you've seen in the video, but I thought Jim Harbaugh looked a little bit more relaxed and forthcoming with some of his answers on a lot of those questions. And there have been years that he's been uptight and he hasn't said a thing, and he looks at you like, he just wants to kill you if you ask a question. But I thought he looked a little bit better this time around. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I thought he definitely seemed more relaxed. I actually chatted with him for a few minutes before he went up to the podium, and I will say he's in the best shape I've seen him in. He said he's been working out really hard, and not that has anything to do with winning football games, but he looked more relaxed. But I thought there were moments, Chris, where he seemed like he was reverting to a little bit, just subtle things where I could tell he didn't like something that was asked. But I think he knows that he is on a much shorter leash, and I think he's going to try. My hunch is maybe he'll try to be a little bit more forthcoming. I don't know, that might be a stretch, but a little more easier to deal with, at least in our interactions.
That'd be okay with me. And then when you said he was working out, I was like, what, is he going to try to play quarterback? And, you never know, man. I'm telling you, because that's where this all begins and ends. You can talk all you want to about the offensive line scheme, but when we talk about Michigan's failures on offense, who's the last NFL caliber quarterback they've had on this team? And Angelique, we'd have to go back to
Chad Henne.
The Chad Henne, and still in the league.
Technically, you guys, wouldn't you say Rudock in Jim's first year? Because technically, he did make it in the NFL a few years.
Yeah.
But when I say NFL quarterback, I'm not talking about the clipboard holders here. Even though Chad Henne is technically that too, I'm talking about a guy that's been there and has been a starter. It's been way too long. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that Michigan was quarterback U. You had Elvis Grbac, and then you had Todd Collins, and then you could, Brian Greasy, this Tom Brady guy, who couldn't even start here at Michigan. So, but to me, that's where it begins. But Skene, talk about the offensive line a little bit. One thing that Harbaugh did say was Chuck Filiaga had the best summer of all of the offensive linemen, but at the same time, he didn't say he was going to start. And what really intrigued me the most was when he started talking about Zach Zinter potentially playing center. And I've long said, I think this best offensive line, if you're talking about getting the 5 best on the field, means Zinter at center. And whether it's Rumler or Keegan or Barnhart or some of those guys, to me, I think that's better than having Andrew Vistardis at center, with all due respect to him.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Balas. And we've seen the flashes of young Zinter last year. You and I broke down some of the stuff that was really eyebrow raising and how good it was. And at the same time, your point is absolutely valid in that the quarterback position at Michigan has been underwhelming. But let's not forget, when's the last NFL caliber running back to come through Michigan? Now you got to go way back. And of course, it's a given that offensive line play is required to have a successful season. Good offensive line play. You've got to protect your quarterback. But if you don't have a quarterback to throw it and put it where it belongs, you don't have a running back that can also block and catch the ball out of the backfield effectively, especially in today's offenses, you have no chance of winning. And sadly, for the last 4 or 5 years under the Harbaugh era, we just haven't seen the production out of those 2 position groups that are required. I think offensive line wise, you and I have talked about this before, they have the talent. There are 5 to 7 good enough offensive linemen in that room to make a productive offense. Will it be a productive offense is a different question, but the talent is there.
Yeah, it sure seems to be. And of course, you're going to have another group of guys starting, right, that haven't played together or haven't started together. And you've always said it takes a while for those guys to gel. So I'm guessing we're not going to see a well-oiled machine, right, in week 1. But to your point about running backs, and Angelique, you're good friends with Mike Hart. I know that he doesn't give you any scoop either, because because he's not talking to anybody. Well, maybe a little. I know how coy you are. But word has it, word on the street. By the way, he wasn't a great NFL running back, but he was an elite college back. So, and you get that sometimes. But word has it that Mike is talking about a couple of the running backs in his room as these guys, could potentially be better than I ever was. And I'm guessing he's talking about Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. But you look at Hassan Haskins, Angelique, and this is the kind of back, I don't know if I'd compare him to a BJ Askew type or something like that, but a guy that can move the chains and just get the job done. And for some reason, guys just can't beat him out. It seems to me that he's going to be the first guy to get carries.
Well, I do think we know that they're faster than Mike was. I mean, Mike was the fastest back. He wasn't. He wasn't the fastest back, but he was so physical. He was such a smart runner. And yes, I think that there is a pretty good comfort level with this group of running backs. Donovan Edwards is the real deal. Young, but I think he will have an accelerated, his progress will be accelerated in large part because I think he's prepared and he is a sharp guy. I think Blake Corum, expecting big things from him, and he reminds me of Mike. I mean, just in terms of stature, but he is faster than Mike Hart was, and I think Mike would tell you that. And Haskins, I agree. I mean, the guy is very deceptive. He played linebacker. He's physical, and I think he knows what he's doing out there. He's got pretty good vision. And I like the fact that he sort of is an under the radar guy in a way. I mean, he's not vocal guy. Maybe that's a bad thing. I'm not sure. But at that position, usually you got guys who are kind of boisterous and bragging about whatever it is they do. But this guy just wants to do his business and get and run the ball. So I think that's a good group. But going back to the point that you made initially, and we could debate offensive line and quarterback play and everything, but it also, and I'm sure you're going to get there, this also goes back to who's calling the plays and how efficiently they're called. So it's not just the players executing, it's what are the play calls? Is Josh Gaddis in his 3rd year? Does he have a much better handle of what he has and how he's going to call? So obviously, it's a team sport. Everything has to work together. But, before we just single out offensive line play and quarterback play, I think he has to up his play as well.
Yeah, and it's fair.
I've been saying that. Balas and I have been talking about that in these podcasts, and I'm glad you said that, Angelique, in that I I say the talent is there. We've seen that. We can see it over the last 2 seasons with all the talent that's moved down to the NFL, and yet the offensive production has not met its equivalent of talent. And why is that? And I've been critical of the Michigan offense and the things that they don't seem to do and don't do well. And some of those things we've detailed in some film breakdowns of asking guys to do things that are damn near impossible. And there's no pressure put on defenses. And I guess what I'm saying here is that if this offense is going to look and feel a lot like it did last year with its tempo, the pace of play calling, the situations it puts defenses in, the talent is not going to overcome the lack of effectiveness coming from the coach. And this offense, to your point, must be better from who's running it from the sidelines.
Yeah, and if they're looking over to the sidelines every play, which you hate, you used to tell me that Elvis Gerback would have 5 or 6. Then the guy on the sidelines better know what the hell he's looking at and what he's doing and calling the right play. And in my opinion, that's something that hasn't been good enough to the last couple of years. We saw one stretch there a few years back where it looked pretty good for about 5 games in a row, right? And you thought, okay,
but
this is the way.
But Balas, I still hate it. I hate it in that time that your whole offense stops and turns to the sideline and waits for the coaches to send that out there. That's time that you could let your quarterback make the call, get into the play, and snap the ball. That creates pressure and timing problems for a defense to react to. When you're a defensive player and you're looking at a whole offense staring at the sideline, you're just sitting there catching your wind, and you're able to adjust, and you can pick up better on keys that the offense is giving you. This isn't just a Michigan thing. I hate watching it in all of college football because the young men that are out there playing this game are smart enough to go to the line with a combination of colors and numbers and call the entire offense at the line of scrimmage. If you train them to, they can do it.
You mean they don't need a big Thomas the Tank Engine sign on the sidelines?
No, they don't.
Okay. There you go. And now get off Skene's lawn, Angelique.
Well, you know what I think back to talking about Gaddis is I thought something, it looked like I don't know if the play calling changed. I don't know if it was Cade McNamara, what he did when he came into that Rutgers game. That was the first time I thought, wow, this is how it's supposed to work. I mean, it looked like the plays were clicking and he was executing really well. It looked like everybody was executing really well when he came into the game. And I'm not knocking Joe Milton, but I was like wondering, is Gaddis calling the game plan differently at this point with Cade in there or what? So I Penn State game, I mean, that was forgettable and McNamara got hurt. But I'm curious to see if they're going to pick up essentially from that Rutgers game and how they call the game with Cade. And to your point too, Doug, I mean, these quarterbacks are smart guys. I've been in the room. I know you've talked to them. So does Chris. These guys, they understand the game plan. They understand the play calls. I don't understand it either. It does sort of look like what are they doing? Just waiting around there. And it would draw defenses. It would push them off balance a little bit. I think a little bit. Then certainly are not off balance now.
Well, the caveat, of course, being it was just Rutgers. And remember, Brandon Peters, there were bloggers and everybody else taking their victory lap after the Brandon Peters big game against Rutgers. And Skene would be the first one to tell you.
We're not going to be saying that, though. Not anymore. You're not going to be saying it's just Rutgers anymore with Schiano.
Yeah, he's done a great job recruiting. In fact, he's out recruiting Michigan right now, building that big fence around the state that he always used to talk about. But, Angelique, I want to ask you this about Mike Hart. How much, in your opinion, of the offense was he involved in at Indiana? I know he was an associate head coach. What were his duties there? And is this a guy that they can kind of rely on, in your opinion, to help kickstart that offense and maybe give Josh Gaddis a boost? Because we know Sharon Moore, too, as the co-offensive coordinator, is also going to have some say.
Yeah, I mean they're the co-offensive coordinators more and Gaddis, but Mike, I think his responsibilities were pretty steep, pretty high at Indiana. I think Tom Allen relied on him quite a bit for his insight into not only play calls but just how players are. How were they in practice? How are they working? And not just the running backs. I mean, this is a guy who connects with a lot of the players. And which is a good thing to have on your staff. And I don't know that Gaddis and Jim Harbaugh and more are going to rely on Mike, but I think in terms of run game calls, I mean they have to, and in that sense, Moore and Sharon and Mike have to work hand in hand, and I think that they get along really well. in developing the run game play calls, but I don't see him. He doesn't have a title. He doesn't have that. So, but I think he's going to do what he can and what he did at Indiana to help this offense click.
Yeah, and obviously he knows what he's doing. He won a championship. He was on the last Big Ten championship team at Michigan, which just blows my mind. Skene, I was talking to some of your colleagues even 10 years ago, and they loved what Mike Hart did, and they loved the Hart that he played with. But they all said the same thing. There's still that offer against Ohio State, and that makes them think. Of course, now you can say that about just about anybody, except for that 2011 class or the guys that played on that team, a couple years before, a couple years after. So, but there's still got to be something there, right? That tells you, because this is a guy that is not known, according to the guys that I've talked to on the team, as a player's coach. This is a no-nonsense guy that's like, okay, you don't really understand the expectations of playing here at Michigan. And I'm going to go back to what you told me the first time we ever talked. There's something that makes you feel better knowing that those guys are in that building. You got to feel pretty good about that.
Well, I do, and there should be an asterisk next to that comment that I made all those years ago. What makes me feel good about having former players in the building? It's former players that were there and won while they were there and got up over the top and knew what it took. And it wasn't just on game day. It's all the way back to January when you start forming a team. And I know one of the Mallory brothers is there. We can talk about Mike as being there, and Bellamy is there. And this is all good stuff because these guys were attached and connected to and were there during the years where they saw it and they felt it and they made their way to the top of the league in their own way and on those teams. Without that connectivity, then former players are great, but they're not as great as having the experience of guys around that knew what it took to win. And that includes everything on the field and off the field.
Yeah, and Jim did mention that, didn't he, Angelique? He was talking about Doug Mallory being there and Ron Bellamy and Mike Hart, and saying Michigan guys, even as analysts, Courtney Morgan, really understand it. And I think that's important because I think he kind of got away from that a little bit, and it seemed like he was kind of running an NFL team for a while there and forgetting kind of what was ingrained in him when he was here.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I thought from the start he should have put more emphasis on that. I mean, he had Tyrone Wheatley, and Tyrone wasn't there very long, but there goes a big connection to recruiting, Detroit recruiting, and Metro Detroit recruiting. Wheatley had a big connection with those guys, with those high school coaches. At the time I thought, maybe you retain, you keep Fred Jackson around, even in an advisory role at that point, when Jim became the head coach in that transition period from Brady Hoke. Maybe you bring a Eric Campbell, you bring Soup Campbell back, have him there because of the recruiting connection he had. And it's not just that. It's what you and Doug referenced. It's about keeping this tradition going, and I think a lot of people want to blow that off, but I think it's a very important lineage to maintain. And I think now in year 7, Jim Harbaugh gets it a little bit. This feels like maybe he's got it right with his staff. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a lot of untested people coaching. I mean, guys in their first year coordinating a defense, etc. But I think he's got that part right finally in year 7. Is you got to have some of these guys with the Michigan pedigree coaching your players. And maybe not maybe Mike Hart was winless against Ohio State, but he certainly knows how to prepare for big games. He won some big games, and that can translate to the players. And he is no nonsense. He is very straightforward and a no BS kind of coach. And I think that's absolutely what this team needs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Skene, some of your colleagues also said that, hey, they weren't putting enough emphasis on the Ohio State game. Now, in what kind of seemed like manufactured rah-rah stuff, I hate to say that, but it kind of came across that way. And I can see by the look on your face that you're probably going to agree with me. Hey, all of a sudden, Ohio State, we're really, boy, we're preparing for them in ways you can't imagine, and so on and so forth. And I think your comment to me a couple of weeks ago was, when did it stop? So when you hear that, doesn't it kind of make you shake your head a little bit and say, because it's obvious to me and anybody else watching that it does mean more, and it has meant more to Ohio State than it does to Michigan. And it's not just Xing out the M's in the word Michigan. It's the way they prepare and the attitude that they have about Michigan of absolute disdain. And I think that, you talk about the respect on the field between the two. I think it got away from that for a while. And to me, it seems that that's one of the reasons that Ohio State has the leg up in this rivalry is because they just wanted it more. Is that unfair?
Well, those things all lead up to the most important factor of all indicators as to how serious you take this game is how well do you play as an individual in that game. And in the last few seasons, we've seen Michigan's best players play their worst football in that game. Collectively, as individuals, as a team, it's just not even close. And uncharacteristic things. Was it 2 years ago? We're untying guys' shoes at the bottom of the pile. We're taking late hits out of bounds. Garbage football like that. That's nowhere close to playing your best or performing your best. Stupid penalties, mental errors, turnovers, simple quarterback center exchanges that turn into turnovers in key moments. If you're going to beat those guys down there in Columbus, none of that is acceptable. You have to play your best, and that's the biggest indicator of all. You can put all the stuff on the walls and you can wear all the T-shirts you want. None of it matters unless you can walk off that field and say, I played my very best today, and we won. Or I played my very best today, and we came just short. In the last few seasons, it ain't just short. We're not even close.
Yeah. How much do you think that had to do, Angelique? In speaking with people about Don Brown's defense, all we had to do, according to some opponents on offense, was put a tight end in motion, and we knew what defense they were going to run. We knew where their defensive backs were going to go, who they were going to cover. We knew we had an underneath route and stuff like that. Do you think that's overblown, or do you think that's fair? And how much of that do you think that a first-year coordinator can really fix?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to be a little unpredictable. I mean, I think it's important to save something for a big game like that. You don't want to show all your cards during the season. And I think Don Brown, with all due respect, in some ways this was a one-trick pony defense, and we knew what it was. We knew what he was going to do. And you go back to the loss in Columbus in 2018, 62-39. I mean, I've said this before. You go to the first half of that Northwestern game when they're down 17-0. Northwestern knew how to defend, how to go against this Michigan defense. They just didn't have the athletes. Then you go a week before that Ohio State game, Indiana. Mike Hart was there then. They certainly did a very good job against the Michigan defense. But again, they didn't have the athletes that Ohio State had the following week. And then you saw a team with great athletes just – I mean, that defense was splintered. It was devastated, as we all know. And I think that there are a lot of people who thought Don Brown should have been sent away, fired after that season. And I don't know enough about Mike Macdonald to know what he's going to do with this defense. My sense is he's a really bright guy. I think that talking to Aiden Hutchinson last week at the Big Ten Media Days, the one word that comes up all the time, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it all the time, is culture, because I'm not really sure what it means. I think it means different things to different people. And Aiden said that he thought culture was X's and O's. If you just execute, if you're in the right gap, everything's going to be great. But he said he had a long talk with Macdonald about, Mike was telling him it's about showing up every day. It's about doing everything you're taught in practice. And I thought, well, okay, that's the culture, I think. That's what I think about. And I think that's a good first step for Mike Macdonald. Is that going to translate to beating Ohio State? I don't know, but I think Doug's right. It's about being respectable against Ohio State and playing your best. And the last time, I think I go back to 2013. Wasn't that the Brady Hoke game? Those guys, the Michigan players are fired up coming out of the locker room. They had a fight during the game, and it felt like that was the last time I remember real heart and soul on that field. Michigan playing Ohio State, and maybe I'm missing a game there, but obviously the short game. But
yeah, I thought 16 they played hard, and some dumb mistakes again. A face mask penalty on Mason Cole down the field on that drive. If they get a first down there, then Ohio State's going to have a hard time to come back. I think it was in the third quarter. And then 18, I thought they played over their heads. I thought it was a great game plan. They just didn't have the quarterback and John O'Korn, but no question. And to me, culture, Skene, and you and I've talked about this a million times as it pertains to Michigan football teams, is it's not okay to lose. Not only is it not okay to lose, and you're going to be devastated for the following week, which we haven't seen enough of from a lot of these guys. It's like, oh, well, so on and so forth. But it's not okay to take plays off. And now we see it so many times, and you and I doing the film where we've talked and we've seen a guy, and I'm not going to name names, but maybe a tight end who's just going through the motions, and you're saying back in the day, they would stop the film and they would say, what an embarrassment you are to you and your teammates, and how dare you think that this is good enough. But of course, he might not have been on the field at that point anyway, because they would have seen what was going on. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And specifically what the deal was uh, the film in front of the whole offense was ran back and forth and back and forth. And the question was pretty simple to the individual that was not meeting expectations. Explain to your team how this is good enough. And there was silence in the room. And then the question was repeated. Explain to your team how this is good enough. And it's just you maybe taking a play off. And it is so embarrassing. And the culture ties in that moment when you realize the guys on their team mean the most to you at that time in your life. And winning a championship is what you're there to do while wearing that uniform. And if those two things add up together the way they should be, you'll never, ever do that again, ever. And if you do it again, somebody else is going to go play in your spot and you get to go watch on the sidelines. Those are the kinds of things that were accountability driven during my experience at Michigan. And those things were driven from the head coach and Schembeckler and Moeller and Lloyd Carr and Les Miles and Jerry Hanlon and Terrell Burton, all of them, all the way down through. And that's what I keep referencing when you and I look at this film and I shake my head and go, how is this individual continuing to find their way on the field when we see these kinds of efforts? And that has been far too prevalent in the last couple seasons. And you and I have looked at this stuff, Balas, in detail. And I shake my head and I go, how is this guy still playing? Is there no one else better? Those are the kinds of things, Angelique, when you talk about Mike Hart being tough on his players, I look forward to seeing how Mike is going to handle his position group if we see a back take a play off, or if we see a back come out for pass protection, throw a chicken wing and whiff and get his quarterback drilled. Is that guy going to continue to play, or is Mike going to pull out the hook, yank them off the field, and give someone else a chance? For young men that are competitive as heck and they all want to go play in the NFL, that's probably one of the fastest things you can do to get their attention is on game day, yank them off the field, tell them that's not good enough, give them another chance and see how they respond. I don't believe there's been enough of that.
I agree with that. Real quick. Okay. Go ahead, Angelique.
No, I was going to say, and I was wondering if Doug noticed this, and Chris, I think we've discussed this. The one thing I always respected about, and I call them the old offensive lines at Michigan. No offense, Doug, but the older offensive lines that I thought were, that really set the tone. And I really could contend, I could make an argument that I think offensive line is the most important position. And if you had a mediocre quarterback and you had a really great offensive line, the mediocre quarterback would still look really good. But the one thing I think is missing, I feel like there's a nastiness missing. Like there's just not this tone setter. I thought Devin Bush was that guy a couple of years ago. I think Aiden Hutchinson can be that guy, but I think on the offensive line, and Jalen Mayfield, I thought could be the guy who didn't really see him that much. But talking to a former Michigan offensive lineman who's in the Hall of Fame, his point was you always needed someone on that offensive line who was this far from being in prison. Just that kind of like just cutthroat. And I think that, to me, in general, I think is something that just across the board, I think has been missing in boatloads, not just one or two players. I think you need a nasty streak. And I don't know if that's going to show up.
I think you're right. Ben Bredesen, I thought, was kind of that guy for a while in his career. So he'd always play to the whistle, but there's no question about it. And Skene talks about that all the time. So, Angelique, I want to talk about NIL for about 3 minutes, but first I want to get your prediction on the season. I've got them at 7-5. There were jokes going around, where's the fourth place trophy for the Big Ten East division here in Indianapolis, and so on and so forth. I think the absolute ceiling for this team is probably 8-4, 9-3 if you get really lucky, like 2011, type of season. But to me, this is a 7-5 football team. Your thoughts?
I haven't gone over it carefully yet, Chris, and I was just thinking about it today. I'm like tossing up between. I could see them going 500. I could see them going, 7 wins max. I don't know where they're getting the 8th win. You're right, yeah. But it's also because we don't know exactly what this defense is going to look like. and I know we can talk about Cade McNamara and the quarterbacks. That's going to be really dictate a lot where this goes. But I think the defense is vital, and I think 7 wins is the max. I don't see 8 wins, 9 wins.
Yeah, and Skene, we attributed his 5-7 prediction to Doug Karsh in the magazine, which really went over well in the Karsh household. He's like, actually, Karsh laughed about it, and but we apologize, Doug, for mixing the two of you up. But you sticking with that 5-7?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm much better looking than Karsh too, so there's that factor.
I don't know. You're both ugly to me.
But yeah, I do still have them at 5-7 because I'm looking at all the question marks, and in college football, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football, your offense had better get north of 35 points per week, and your defense had better be able to keep them under 35 points. And I'm not talking about in the games against Western Michigan. I'm talking about against the 5 opponents that we all circle every year. And those are the ones that matter the most. And those are the ones that determine whether you get a shot to go to the championship or not. And there's just not enough. And there's not enough certainty in those positions to say anything otherwise. And then you factor in, like we talked about earlier, the style of the offense, what it's going to be able to do, who's going to run it. I just don't see it. I think there's too many questions at hand. And I see a 5-7 season.
Yeah.
Well, if that happens, then Jim Harbaugh doesn't come back, right?
That's got to be the case, Angelique. I mean, people ask me all the time, "What do you think? What do you think?" Well, if we repeat another blowout, embarrassing loss to Wisconsin, Michigan State with half the football talent, and that's no disrespect to Michigan State. Michigan State with half the football talent gets us again. A Penn State program that has definitely cracks in their foundation and is swirling around the toilet a little bit, I think, out there in Pennsylvania. They've got problems. They've got culture problems. And then Indiana, who's a program that's been on the rise, maximizing their talent. And then you finish the season off with getting blown off the field again before halftime by Ohio State. There's no way Jim Harbaugh can return. It's not that I want that to happen. I absolutely don't want it to happen. But this is no longer a one-season coincidence for me. I think this is a full-blown pattern and pathway that we're on. I hope that we can pull back on the stick and get this airplane flying up into the air higher. But right now, I don't have a warm and fuzzy about the direction of Michigan football. And I hope my words find their way and bounce around the inside of Schembechler Hall when every one of those guys says Skene's an old a-hole. He don't know what he's talking about, and prove me wrong. And nothing would make me happier than to see this Michigan football team prove me wrong and go out and drop a championship season.
Okay, we'll talk NIL with you in a couple weeks or 3 weeks, Angelique, as we get closer to football season, because I don't want to go any further. But if that were to happen with Jim Harbaugh, what do you do? Because you just signed a bunch of assistant coaches to 2- and 3-year guaranteed contracts, Angelique. Do you promote from within? Because I've always thought that Mike Hart's going to be a head coach someday. And, it's way too premature to talk about that. But in my opinion, that's a guy that is going to be the head of a program somewhere. You know what? You look at Juwan Howard and what happened at Michigan, and everybody was ripping on them for hiring him. This guy turned out to be the perfect successor. Now, of course, he inherited a Cadillac, right? Whereas the next guy is going to be inheriting not a moribund program, but certainly not one that's reaching its potential. But what do you do if Jim Harbaugh gets fired this year?
But wouldn't you want someone who's been in the inside for at least a year and like a Mike Hart who understands what pieces are there and what's missing? I mean, I think, we've talked all about youth on this staff, and I keep saying that doesn't equate to lack of experience. The guy has 10 years of experience. I've always been a big believer in Mike Hart. I think he could be a head coach. Would Ward Manuel have the I don't know, guts to hire him? I'm not sure. You could look at a Tyrone Wheatley. I mean, if you want to keep that Michigan connection going, and I don't know if that's necessarily the right course either, but I do think Mike could handle it. I think he understands this job and what it takes. But you're right. I mean, I don't want to write off Jim Harbaugh yet. I do look at him having a 2-year window. I think Harbaugh's got a 2-year window here, and and look, if he goes like 7-5, beats Michigan State, and is respectable against Ohio State, I think he survives another in a loss. Ohio State, I think he survives another year, and I think we have this discussion at that point. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely think Mike Hart could be the next head coach. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it is a 2-year thing. And look at Skene; he's like 5-7 or 6-6, and he gets to keep his job. He's like, oh my god, So
well, listen, and it's all tempered with the expectation and the understanding that the 2021 season is a long way removed from 1992, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. I understand that. I get that. How much patience are the movers and shakers that form that athletic department going to put up with the embarrassing losses that we've seen in the last couple seasons? I think Angelique is correct. If we go out, show some grit, show some development, show some team development, and there's indicators that are pointing in the right direction in some of these biggest of moments, that changes the discussion. What I meant earlier was if we see a repeat of the disaster of last year and some of the effort in those games, then it's got to be over with. Yep. I hope it doesn't happen. I have been saying it for 15, 18 years, Balas. I want these young men to experience the greatness of winning championships in that uniform like I had the opportunity to do, because it's so much fun and it forms you for so many years later on in your life. It helps you in so many different ways. I want the same for these guys, and I just hope it happens. I really do. But I have my expectations tempered with recent reality.
Yep, 5-time Big Ten championship Doug Skene, Angelique Chengelis, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to do this again, like I said, before football season. I know it's going to get busier, Angelique. We won't keep you for 35 minutes next time, probably only like 33 or 34. But really appreciate you joining us. You are top of your profession, as much as it pains me to admit it. And Skene, appreciate your input as always. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right,
thanks for the time.